In the heart of a small town in Colorado, right on the corner of Main Street, stood a little store called Harper's Market. It wasn't fancy, just old wooden shelves, a worn-out counter, and a rusty scale that hadn't worked properly in years. Every detail carried the weight of better days gone by. The owner was Mrs. Harper, a 58-year-old widow who had spent her entire life running that corner store. Her gray hair was always tied back in a loose bun, her hands rough from years of lifting boxes and filling bags of flour, and her tired eyes carried the quiet strength of someone who had never truly given up. That night, she sat behind the counter, counting the last bills in the register. $42. That was all she had left. The rent was overdue, the power company had already sent a warning, and the landlord had given her less than 2 weeks before she'd lose the store completely. On the wall behind her hung an old framed photo, her and her late husband, David, smiling proudly on the day they opened the store, nearly 30 years ago. He had been her partner in everything, but a sudden heart attack had taken him 6 years earlier. Since then, Mrs. Harper carried the burden alone, clinging to the dream they had built together. "How much longer can I hold on?" she whispered softly, pushing her glasses up her nose. Outside, the sky was turning dark. Strong winds rattled the wooden door, carrying the smell of a storm rolling in. It was nearly 9 p.m., and Main Street was empty. No customers, no neighbors stopping by for milk or bread. The whole town seemed to be asleep, while Mrs. Harper sat in silence, battling her own storm inside the little store. She poured herself a cup of weak coffee, reheated for the 3rd time on the old gas stove. The warmth brought back memories. Years ago, this place had been full of life. Children buying candy, mothers asking for groceries on credit, truck drivers stopping for a quick snack and a laugh. Now, only the echo of loneliness filled the aisles. Suddenly, the lights flickered twice. Her heart raced. If the power went out, the last few products in her fridge would spoil, and that would be the end. With misty eyes, she leaned against the counter, staring at the nearly empty shelves. Outside, the rain began to pound harder until another sound broke through the storm. At first, she thought it was thunder, but no, it was different. Engines, loud, heavy engines rumbling closer on the wet road. Mrs. Harper walked slowly to the door, her hand trembling on the handle. Through the foggy glass, beams of light cut through the darkness. Headlights. 1, 2, 3. She lost count. What she knew for sure was that many vehicles were pulling up right in front of her little store. Her chest tightened. Who were these people arriving in the middle of a storm, and why her corner store on this night when everything seemed to be falling apart? The storm grew fiercer by the minute. Rain slammed against the windows of Harper's Market, rattling the glass as if the whole building was about to give way. The neon sign outside flickered weakly, its buzzing sound almost drowned out by the roar of the thunder. Inside, Mrs. Harper stood frozen by the door, her hands still on the handle, her breath quick and shallow. Through the sheets of rain, the headlights became clearer. One after another, motorcycles pulled into Main Street, their tires splashing water across the pavement. The engines growled like wild animals, echoing off the empty storefronts. Mrs. Harper counted as best she could, 15 motorcycles, all large, all roaring in unison. Her first instinct was fear. In a town this small, a group like that could mean trouble. These weren't just casual bikers out for a weekend ride. Their presence was heavy, commanding. She could see their leather jackets, patches glistening in the rain, faces hidden under helmets streaked with water. The motorcycles slowed to a stop directly in front of her store, their headlights casting long shadows across the parking lot. The engines cut one by one until only the sound of rain remained. The sudden silence was almost louder than the roar had been. Mrs. Harper's heart pounded. She thought about switching off the lights, pretending the store was closed. If she stayed quiet, maybe they'd move on, find another place to wait out the storm. But then she saw movement. The lead rider dismounted. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his leather jacket soaked through, his boots splashing into the puddles as he walked. With steady steps, he approached the door. His helmet came off, revealing a rugged face with a dark beard streaked with gray. His eyes, though tired, carried a sharpness, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and survived it all. He stopped just outside, rain dripping from his jacket, and looked through the glass straight at her. For a moment, Mrs. Harper felt like time froze. She could almost hear David's voice in her head. "Don't be afraid, Rose. Sometimes people just need a little kindness." Then came the knock. 3 gentle raps on the glass. Not aggressive, not demanding, just asking. Her hands trembled. She glanced back at the counter where the foreclosure notice lay half hidden under the register. Her whole life was falling apart, and now 15 strangers were standing at her door. She swallowed hard, whispering to herself, "What do I do?" The man outside waited, motionless, rain dripping from his beard. Behind him, the other riders stood silently, not pushing forward, not shouting, just waiting. Mrs. Harper tightened her shawl around her shoulders, her breath fogging the glass. Then slowly, she reached for the lock. For a long moment, Mrs. Harper just stood there, her hand hovering over the lock. The storm pounded outside, shaking the thin walls of the corner store. Every instinct told her to keep the door closed. 15 bikers in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm. Nothing about it felt safe. But then she looked closer. The man at the front wasn't banging or yelling. His hands stayed where she could see them. His posture wasn't threatening. He simply waited, rain dripping from his jacket, his eyes steady and tired. Behind him, the others shifted restlessly, but none of them made a move to push forward. Her mind spun with doubts. What if they're dangerous? What if they wreck the store? I don't even have enough food for all of them. She glanced at the nearly empty shelves. A few cans of beans, some rice, bread that was already going stale. Not nearly enough to feed 15 grown men. But then in the silence, she heard her late husband's voice again, clear as if he were standing right beside her. "Kindness, Rose. Always choose kindness, even when it costs you." She closed her eyes, exhaled sharply, and turned the lock. The click of the door seemed louder than the thunder. Slowly, she pulled it open. The tall man stepped forward, removing his gloves. Up close, she could see the lines in his face, the gray in his beard. He looked older than she expected, maybe in his mid-40s. His voice, when he finally spoke, was rough but respectful. "Ma'am," he said, dipping his head slightly, "I know this is asking a lot. We've been riding for hours in this storm. We just need a place to wait it out. Nothing more." Mrs. Harper's throat felt dry. She studied his face, then the others still standing out in the rain. They looked exhausted, soaked to the bone. One of the younger men, barely more than a boy, shivered violently, his hands trembling as he tried to keep them warm. "How many of you are there?" she asked softly, even though she already knew. 15, the man answered. "But if it's too much, we'll figure something out." For a moment, the silence stretched between them. Her fingers tightened on the doorframe. She thought of the foreclosure notice. She thought of the empty shelves. She thought of the fear in her chest. And then, without another word, she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in. All of you."
Relief washed across the man's face. He turned to his group and gave a single nod. One by one, the bikers filed inside, stomping the snow and rain from their boots, careful not to track too much water across the floor. Mrs. Harper counted them as they entered. 1, 2, 3, until all 15 stood inside her little store. They filled the space completely, leather jackets dripping, boots squeaking against the linoleum. The youngest hovered near the door, still shivering, while the older ones quietly found spots against the wall or at the tables by the window. As the storm howled outside, Mrs. Harper realized something. For the first time in months, her store wasn't empty anymore. The room grew warmer once the door shut against the storm, but Mrs. Harper still felt a chill in her bones. 15 men filled her small corner store, dripping rainwater onto the cracked linoleum. Their heavy leather jackets carried the smell of the road, of gasoline and rain-soaked asphalt. For a moment, she wondered if she had made a mistake letting them in. The tall man, clearly the leader, removed his jacket and hung it carefully over the back of a chair. His eyes met hers, steady but full of gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am," he said simply. "You didn't have to do this." Mrs. Harper nodded stiffly, unsure how to respond. She glanced at the shelves behind her counter, a few loaves of bread, some canned goods, half a carton of eggs, not nearly enough to feed 15 grown men. But then, in the silence, she heard her late husband's voice again, clear as if he were standing right beside her. "Kindness, Rose. Always choose kindness, even when it costs you." She closed her eyes, exhaled sharply, and turned the lock. The click of the door seemed louder than the thunder. Slowly, she pulled it open. The tall man stepped forward, removing his gloves. Up close, she could see the lines in his face, the gray in his beard. He looked older than she expected, maybe in his mid-40s. His voice, when he finally spoke, was rough but respectful. "Ma'am," he said, dipping his head slightly, "I know this is asking a lot. We've been riding for hours in this storm. We just need a place to wait it out. Nothing more."
Embarrassed, the leader stepped closer. "Ma'am, we can pay. Whatever you've got, it's worth something to us. Don't think we expect it for free." Mrs. Harper shook her head firmly. "Money doesn't matter right now. You're cold, you're wet, and I've got a stove. That's what matters." Before she could change her mind, she moved behind the counter and began gathering what little food remained. A loaf of bread, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, some cans of soup from the back. It wasn't enough for 15 men, but it was something. She turned on the small stove, the hiss of the flame filling the silence. The bikers quietly spread out around the store. Some sat at the small tables near the window. Others leaned against the walls. They didn't speak loudly, didn't laugh or shout. They just sat there, the storm raging outside, watching her with a kind of respect she didn't expect. As the smell of warm soup filled the room, Mrs. Harper caught sight of one biker slipping off his gloves. His hands were scarred, knuckles roughed and swollen, but he cradled the warm mug she handed him as if it were made of gold. Another passed a plate of bread to the youngest, insisting he eat first. It wasn't the scene she'd imagined. For years, she'd heard stories about bikers, dangerous, reckless, violent. Yet here they were, sitting quietly in her corner store, thanking her for stale bread and canned soup like it was a feast. Her hands trembled as she carried the last pot to the counter. "I'm sorry it's not more," she said softly. The leader raised his mug in her direction. "Ma'am, this is more than enough. You've given us something money can't buy tonight. Warmth, shelter, a little kindness." And for the first time in a long time, Mrs. Harper felt the faint spark of something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The storm outside raged on, hammering the roof of Harper's Market like 1,000 fists. But inside, the corner store was filled with a strange, quiet warmth. 15 bikers sat scattered around the small space, bowls of soup in their hands, steam rising to fog the windows. Mrs. Harper leaned against the counter, exhausted,
but strangely at peace. She watched them eat, noticing how careful they were. They didn't make a mess, didn't raise their voices. Even the younger one, still shivering near the window, cupped his bowl carefully, blowing on it before taking each sip. Silence lingered for a while, broken only by the storm and the clinking of spoons. Then one of the older bikers cleared his throat. His jacket bore a patch that read, "Marcus, Sergeant at Arms." He was broad-shouldered, his arms covered in tattoos that told stories of their own. "You remind me of my wife," he said suddenly, his voice deep but gentle. "She runs a diner back in Nevada, always fussing over everyone, even when there wasn't enough for us." Mrs. Harper blinked, surprised by the unexpected softness in his tone. "How long have you been married?" 30 years, Marcus replied with a small smile. "She's tough as nails, but her heart's too big for her own good, just like you." The others chuckled quietly, nodding in agreement. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to fade, replaced by the hum of shared memories. Another biker, a lean man with sharp eyes and a faded scar down his cheek, set his bowl on the table. "Name's Pete," he said. "You probably don't remember me, but I stopped here once. Must have been 10, maybe 12 years ago. Truck broke down on the highway. I was stuck, freezing. You gave me hot coffee and called a mechanic for me. Wouldn't even take my money." Mrs. Harper tilted her head, searching his face. A flicker of memory returned. A man, stranded at night, his truck hood up, his hands trembling from the cold. She remembered bringing him coffee in a thermos. "That was you?" she whispered. "That was me, and I never forgot it." The room grew still. Then the youngest one, the boy who had barely spoken all night, finally found his voice. His name, she learned, was Danny. His hands shook as he set down his spoon. "I came here 3 years ago," he said softly, his eyes fixed on the table. "I was lost. My parents had kicked me out. I'd dropped out of school, didn't have $1 on my name. I thought maybe I'd just keep writing until I disappeared." His voice cracked, but he forced himself to go on. "You gave me a sandwich. You told me tomorrow didn't have to look like today, and you gave me a number for a friend of yours in Salt Lake City. That job saved my life." Mrs. Harper felt her chest tighten. She remembered him now, a skinny kid with hollow eyes, riding a bike that looked like it was held together with duct tape. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. She just did what she always did, tried to help. But looking at him now, stronger, surrounded by men who treated him like a brother, she realized something she had never let herself believe before. Maybe her little acts of kindness hadn't been so small, after all.
Jake, the leader, raised his mug again. His eyes locked on hers, steady and sincere. "You've done more than keep a store running, ma'am. You've been a light on this road for a long time, more than you know." For the first time in months, Mrs. Harper felt tears roll down her cheeks, not from fear or despair, but from the sudden, overwhelming truth she wasn't as forgotten as she thought. The storm pressed harder against the old glass windows, wind howling like a wounded animal. But inside Harper's Market, the little store was wrapped in warmth, not just from the stove, but from the stories unfolding one after another. Mrs. Harper sat down slowly at the counter stool, her legs weak beneath her. For years she had believed she was invisible, forgotten, a woman waiting for the bank to take away everything she and David had built. Yet here were these men, strangers yet not strangers, reminding her of things she had long buried. Marcus leaned forward, his tattooed arms resting on the table. "Do you remember a truck driver with a red beard, Western Mountain Transport, about 12 years ago?" Mrs. Harper frowned, trying to recall. The memory surfaced suddenly, sharp as lightning. A winter night, a man clutching his chest outside her store, face pale with fear. She'd called an ambulance, stayed with him until it arrived, even rode along to the hospital so he wouldn't be alone. Yes, she whispered. I remember. Marcus smiled softly. That was my cousin, Tommy. He said if you hadn't acted fast, he wouldn't have made it. He's alive today because of you. Mrs. Harper covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. She had never thought of it as extraordinary, just what anyone would have done. Yet to them, it was life itself. Another voice came from the corner. The man with the mohawk, his voice gruff, almost reluctant. 15 years ago, I broke down outside this town. Bike was shot. I had no cash, nothing. You gave me soup, let me sleep on the bench, and when I woke up, someone had fixed my bike. That was you, wasn't it? Mrs. Harper nodded slowly, her throat too tight to speak. You didn't even ask my name, he continued. Just told me, everyone deserves a second chance. His eyes softened, unexpected for such a rough man. That stuck with me. Been living by it ever since. The store went quiet again. Rain drummed steadily on the roof, thunder rolling in the distance. And then Jake, the leader, spoke. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Do you know what you've been all these years, ma'am? Mrs. Harper looked at him confused. A beacon, Jake said. A light on this road. You thought you were just selling groceries, handing out coffee, giving sandwiches to strangers, but you've been saving lives, holding people together when they were falling apart. We don't forget that. The words pierced through her like sunlight through clouds. She had always seen herself as a failing shopkeeper, a woman waiting for the bank to take away everything she and David had built. Yet here were these men, strangers yet not strangers, reminding her of things she had long buried. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter. I didn't do anything special, she murmured. Exactly. That's what makes it special, Marcus replied firmly. In a world that's gotten colder, you stayed warm. For the first time in months, maybe years, Mrs. Harper allowed herself to cry freely. And as she did, she felt the weight she had carried for so long, the debt, the loneliness, the fear, begin to shift. She wasn't alone after all. The rain outside hammered against the tin roof like a relentless drum, but inside Harper's Market, the air felt thick with something else entirely. Not fear, not despair, but reverence. Mrs. Harper sat quietly on the stool behind the counter, her eyes swollen from tears. The bikers, 15 rough-looking men who could have easily been mistaken for trouble, were silent, their gazes fixed on her with something close to awe. It was Pete who finally broke the silence. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his scarred face softened. Jake's right. You're not just some shopkeeper. You've been holding this stretch of road together longer than any of us realized. A murmur of agreement swept through the room. The man with the mohawk nodded firmly, his voice low. We ride thousands of miles every year. We've seen places come and go, but people still talk about this little store, about the woman who never turned anyone away. Danny with the youngest looked up, his eyes shining in the dim light. To me, this isn't just a store. It was the first place I felt seen, like I mattered. His voice cracked, but he didn't look away. That changed me. It saved me. Mrs. Harper shook her head, overwhelmed. I just did what anyone would have done. No, Marcus said firmly, leaning forward. Anyone wouldn't have. That's the point. He tapped the counter gently, his tattooed hand dwarfed by the wood. In a world that's gotten colder, you stayed warm. Jacket. The morning air was crisp,
carrying the scent of wet asphalt. He lit a cigarette, took one drag, then flicked it away, almost as if he didn't need it anymore. He just smiled, tilting his head as a distant rumble echoed across Main Street. At first, Mrs. Harper thought it was just leftover thunder, but then the sound grew louder, deeper, more powerful. Engines, dozens of them. She walked to the door, her heart racing, and froze. Rolling down Main Street in tight formation were motorcycles, trucks, and cars. Headlights beamed in the morning mist, chrome flashing in the sun. One after another, they pulled up in front of her little store until the entire street was filled. The sound was deafening, a roar of loyalty, of brotherhood, of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. Doors swung open, boots hit the pavement. Men and women, riders from different states, different chapters, stepped out, their leather jackets proudly displaying their colors. Some carried envelopes, others tools, and more than a few had their arms wide open, ready to hug the woman they had come for. The first to reach her was a massive man with a fiery red beard. His smile split his weathered face as he wrapped her in a bear hug that lifted her right off her feet. "Sarah Harper," he boomed, his voice echoing across the crowd. "I saved my life 13 years ago. I've been waiting all this time to repay you." Tears streamed down her face as he set her down, but before she could speak, others stepped forward. A woman from Salt Lake City pressed an envelope into her hands. "This isn't a gift," she said firmly. "It's a promise. You keep this place open, and we'll keep you standing." A man from Phoenix showed his arm, a long scar that ran from wrist to elbow. "You patched me up when no one else would. I never forgot." Everywhere she turned there were faces, some familiar, some not, but all carrying the same message: gratitude. Mrs. Harper could hardly breathe. Her little store, once on the edge of collapse, was now overflowing with people whose lives had crossed hers in ways she never realized. It wasn't just her corner store anymore. It was their place, a sanctuary built on decades of quiet kindness. She looked out at the sea of leather jackets, chrome, and roaring engines. Her lips trembled as she whispered, half to herself and half to the sky, "David, can you see this? We did it." And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The roar of engines faded into a steady hum as the crowd gathered outside Harper's Market. What had once been an empty, forgotten corner of Main Street was now overflowing with life. Bikers leaned on their motorcycles, families and pickup trucks stepped forward with warm smiles, and neighbors peeked from their porches, astonished at the sight. Mrs. Harper stood in the doorway, her hands trembling as she clutched the envelope given to her. Inside was more money than she had seen in years, enough to pay off the debt, enough to buy time, enough to breathe again. But it wasn't just the money. It was the faces, the hugs, the stories whispered in her ear by strangers who weren't really strangers at all. Jake walked up beside her, his boots crunching on the wet pavement. He didn't say much at first, just looked at the crowd with quiet pride. Finally, he turned to her. "See, ma'am, you thought you were alone, but you've had an army behind you all along." Mrs. Harper shook her head, tears streaming freely. "I don't deserve this. I was just doing what anyone would do." Jake's smile was small but firm. "No, you did what most people wouldn't do. That's why we're here." The bikers began unloading supplies: lumber, paint, tools. Some carried in crates of food to restock her shelves. Others swept the floor, repaired the broken sign, and patched the leaky roof. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos. Her little store buzzed with more energy than it had seen in decades. By midday, Harper's Market no longer looked like a place on the edge of death. It looked alive. The neon sign glowed bright again,
the shelves filled, the smell of hot coffee drifting into the street. And outside, motorcycles lined the road for half a mile, a silent declaration: this place is under our protection. As the sun set, Mrs. Harper stood on the front steps, looking out at the sea of bikes and people. Her heart swelled with a warmth she hadn't felt since David was alive. For years, she had carried the burden of this store alone, thinking it was only her dream. But now she saw the truth. The dream belonged to everyone who had ever walked through her door. Jake placed a hand on her shoulder. From now on, you're not just the owner of Harper's Market, you're our angel on this road. And angels don't fall, not while we're here. The engines revved in unison, a thunderous salute that shook the ground beneath her feet. Mrs. Harper closed her eyes, the vibrations rushing through her chest, and whispered into the wind,
"The lights will stay on, always." From that day forward, no traveler passed through Colorado without stopping at Harper's Market. It wasn't just a corner store anymore. It was a beacon, a place of refuge, of respect, of second chances. And every night, as she brewed coffee and wiped down the counter, Mrs. Harper would glance at David's photo on the wall and smile. Because she knew now, without a doubt, that his dream, their dream, was alive. And it always would be.